I'm glad you sung that. Yesterday was a deep searching day and some spiritual things for me as I was preparing for the Psalms that I'm going to lecture on to you in the next 3 weeks and at the National Association. And the first Psalm begins, "Happy, blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly." And I reread the Beatitudes. And it's interesting, I don't know why, you'll probably hear it again, but it's interesting because blessed is sort of a passive thing. The more recent translations are talking about how happy, how blessed, how exciting is life, and it's always in the plural form. It is not blessed in a sense, but it's a plural kind of a thing, that there are multiple blessings for the one who kind of does these things. And to have you sing it at this point was very nice. Thank you. This is a sermon that probably should be preached in about 3 weeks. If you get it today, it's just because we're in the process of putting it together today. But it's a sermon which I think is extremely important for us to begin to play with a little bit. I recognize immediately that I am going to make a couple of very false dichotomies here, and I hope that you will forgive me for doing so. It is not because I don't know that the word duty and obligation is essentially a synonym, but because I think there's some emphasis within the synonyms that are very important for us to try to grab a hold of. And if we don't grab a hold of it, I think we'll fail to understand some interrelated and interlocking types of understanding about God and life. The book of Deuteronomy, the second giving of the law, is one of the books in which, according to the tradition, Moses read and talked to the people just before they crossed into the Promised Land. On a number of occasions, if you've read anything about novels growing out of the biblical period, the one thing that people say to you, if you want a full understanding of who and what and how, the best book in the Old Testament to read is the book of Deuteronomy. There's a certain power, a certain amount of history, a certain amount of feeling, a certain amount of understanding of what it's all about. And it's a challenge to the people of Israel from Moses just prior to their going into a new situation. A situation which, for a number of reasons, Moses himself is not going to be permitted to join. The most God will permit of Moses is that he will stand on Mount Nebo, which can be seen across the Dead Sea, across the Jordan River from Israel, and look off. And yea, from that way he might even see Jerusalem on a clear day, but he was not to enter the land. And as he talked to the people who were to go over and recognizing that the end of his days was coming, he could only ask them, "And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God ask of you, but to fear the Lord your God, and follow his ways exactly, to love and to serve the Lord with all your heart and all your soul, your being, your existence. To keep the commandments and the statutes of the Lord, which I enjoin you today for your own good. Think, the heavens, even the highest heavens, belong to the Lord your God, as well as the earth and everything on it. Yet in his love for your fathers, the Lord was so attached to them as to choose you, their descendants, in preference to all other peoples, as indeed he has now done. Circumcise your hearts." Anybody know what that means? It's a curious phrase. Circumcise your hearts. Anybody want to make a guess? Cleanse or purify. You're on it, almost. Come on, a little more. What is circumcision? Sign of the covenant between God and his people. And therefore, to circumcise your heart is to acknowledge that not only is there an outer sign, but the inner sign is there. A sign of obligation, a sign of duty, a sign of all kinds of relationships. And so the challenge is, it's not only the outer, but the inner. Circumcise your hearts, therefore, and be no longer stiff-necked. For the Lord your God is the God of gods, the Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who has no favorites, accepts no bribes, who executes justice for the orphan and the widow, and befriends the alien, feeding and clothing him. So you too must befriend the alien. For you were once aliens yourselves in the land of Egypt. The Lord your God shall you fear, and him shall you serve. Hold fast to him and swear by his name. He is your glory. He, your God, who has done for you these great and terrible things which your eyes have seen. Serve the Lord your God. Last week we talked about tensions. And I think that tensions are extremely important in life, and we talked about how tensions are constantly being used to keep us somewhat in balance. For as things pull us on one way, if we don't have the normal kinds of tensions, it's easy for us to move beyond farther and farther away from that which we truly are and who we are, unless there is the tension on the other side to make our moving and to keep us in balance. For tensions are what give us balance in our lives. We talked about it in terms of a number of things, but in today's world we're in a constant tension between the concepts of freedom on one side and duty and obligation on the other. Freedom, duty, and obligation. And the story which I've told, and is one that I think always hits to the core of freedom, and at the same time raises up the concepts of tension, is the story of the young man who's walking along with the other young man. They get into an argument, and finally the fellow turns and swats him in the nose. And the nose is bleeding, as you will remember the story, and the blood's pouring down like this, and with rare Christian acumen, something that I think most of us would not be able to do, he turned to his friend who had just hit him and said, "Why did you do that?" And he said, "I'm free to do what I want to do." And the other individual says, "But your freedom ends where my nose begins." Now that tension between the freedom that says I can do what I want and let the chips fall where they may, if I feel it's right, then don't you worry about it, and the duties and the obligations and the tensions that come out of all existence, including the deeper duties and obligations to myself, as I try to understand myself, are tensions which can never be broken. For like the flexing of the muscles back and forth, we are constantly developing those kinds of inner tensions which will keep us in balance. To be true, duty and obligation are synonyms. I fully understand that. But no synonym is perfectly parallel, and I think if you allow that a great deal of it is being covered like this, I want to talk a little bit about two edges of duty and obligation, and at the end bring them together in a little special way. I think duty is an outer imposition. I think in many ways it is duties. And remember, these are overlapping terms. So don't say, but obligation is too. I understand that. I think in many ways duties are the things which are spelled out for us by society. It oftentimes has deeply woven into it, you ought. You should. You must. This is what you should be doing. This is what you ought to be doing. They're the kinds of things that very often we talk to our kids about. You have to go to school. You have to do your homework. You have to do your homework before your special Snoopy comes on, or you can't watch it. And the kid suddenly feels maybe an obligation, but the fact is that the duty on the outside is bringing all kinds of pressures to bear on it. And that sense of duty is not wrong. Even though in a society which is moving and floating as freely as our society seems to be, that we sometimes want to remove the sense of duty or even the sense of obligation in the name of a higher freedom, free to be me. The fact of the matter is that there is a duty which is very much a part of life. This week, as I was reflecting upon the sermon, I once again took out and reread Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, Night Flight. Night Flight, as you'll remember, is the story of the opening up of the airlines in South America. And the airlines, when they first began to carry mail, were very competitive during the daytime, in fact, because of their speed, that they could compete against the ships and against the railways. And so therefore, during the daytime, the mail moved quickly. But as is said in the book, every time night came, the gains of the day were lost because they were not equipped to fly at night. And every new venture, every new movement into new areas of life, as you move into it, have certain risks and certain pains and certain developments. Well, there is no such thing as a flow of life where there go without those kinds of chancy iffies. It's a chancy world, Carl Sandburg once said. It's an iffy world. And the pilots who were going to begin the night flight without the controls, without the radar, without the kinds of instrumentation that we now have, without the accuracy of weather reporting, were driven out into the night to try to fly. And André Gide, who wrote the introduction to Night Flight, talks about the power of the chief of the pilots. The man is strange. He's loved by all. He's feared. And he has some ideas. More striking even than the aviator himself is, in my opinion, Riviere, his chief. The latter does not act himself. He impels to action. Breathes into his pilots his own virtue and exacts the utmost from them, constraining them to dare greatly. His iron will admits no flinching, and the least lapse is punished by him. At first sight, his severity may seem inhuman and excessive, but his target is not the man himself whom Riviere aspires to mold, but the man's blemishes. In his portrayal of this character, we find the author's profound admiration. I, André Gide, am grateful to him for bringing out a paradoxical truth which seems to me to be of great psychological import, that man's happiness lies not in freedom, but in his acceptance of a duty. Each of the characters in this book is wholeheartedly, passionately devoted to that which duty bids him to do, and it is in the fulfilling of this perilous task, and only thus, that he attains contentedness and peace. It's an interesting idea. And the reason it fascinated me over the years as I've read and reread, particularly that introduction, is it's a biblical idea. For what is it that's being said there? That a man must lose himself before he can find himself. That the effort to find without at the same time reaching out to serve and to accept duty and to understand what is going on is a false effort. Man's happiness is not in freedom, but in his acceptance of duty. If that be the case, what's obligation? I think the acceptance of duty becomes the obligation. I can force something on the outside. I can push, I can drive, I can do all kinds of things. I can tell my kids what's best for them. I can instruct individuals what's best for them, although I almost never do it quite that way, because I don't have quite that much chutzpah to know what's best for anybody. I can only help. And the imposition of duty in some ways is to kind of give some guidance, but ultimately the imposition of duty comes at a point when the obligation comes from not the outside, but from the inside. And for me, at the extremes, duty is that which society or friends or wives or husbands or children or parents or whatever put on you. Obligation is that which is accepted. And perhaps a word picture is the best way to do it. I can be the pilot of a ship driven before a storm. The duty is the fact the storm is driving me. I can fight against that. I can acknowledge that I should make for a safe port. But I can say it's beyond my control, I will have nothing to do with it, and allow the storm to drive without any effort whatsoever. The obligation is the ability to recognize what the duty is, to get in touch with the duty, and to recognize that the duty is driving me in a direction that I can creatively use and make towards the safe port. And at the time that I recognize that tension and make the decision to allow the duty to be the creative force and the obligation to accept it, I begin to grow in maturity. P.H. Noel Smith, fascinating little book on ethics. I'm talking about obligation and duty, and comes from a much different point of view than I do. Points out that obligation involves freedom. That's what I think we often miss. That's why the picture of the being driven by the storm is so important. The storm may be the duty. We don't have too much freedom to be driven or not driven when we're facing certain kinds of pressures like that. But obligation involves the freedom. Freedom is the ability to fulfill one's aims, not the state of being aimless. Go back to that picture. You're being driven by the storms. All of life is storm. You can sit and you can walk and you can hold on and you can rock and you can move back and forth on the boat and you can say, I don't want to be driven by the storm. This is not what I want to do. But the storm is there. There are people who say this storm will pass, but storms never pass. They always leave something. And as the storm is driving you, you can fight the storm, you can head into the storm, you can do all kinds of things, but ultimately, as we recognize, the major storms of life will move their way, whether it's according to our purposes or not. And the ability to focus on the storm and to utilize the freedom to flow with it creatively, to use the power that is pushing you in directions that are more acceptable to you, is where the real maturity of life comes. For the duties can be pushed, the storms, the exiges of life can come along and pushing us like this, and the real maturity is I cannot change what is pushing me, but under God I will give direction and go. And freedom is the ability to fulfill one's aims, not the aimlessness that says, woe is me, what is happening? Now, if any of this makes sense, it does to me, I don't know whether I'm communicating it or not. If any of this makes sense, and if it fits in your own life a little bit, then what's the relationship ultimately? We've kind of spelled it out between freedom and duty and obligation in a very nice way, but between love. Where does love fit in all of this? And here I have to disagree for a reason which I'll tell you in just a moment with André Gide and his argumentation in this book. It has nothing to do with the sermon, but it's a fascinating line. I've been thinking about it all week. I just throw it out almost without comment. To make oneself beloved, one needs only show pity. And that sort of grabs, doesn't it? To make oneself beloved, one only needs to show pity. A sense of duty commands the Riviere in all things, quote, that dark sense of duty greater than that of love. I don't believe it. I don't believe it because flashing before my eyes as I close them and look off into the distance, I see one of those powerful things that movies, music, and you all know what I'm going to mention for. And the fiddler on the roof, the husband and the wife come together after many years of marriage. He sings a very powerful little song. Do you love me? What do you mean, do I love you? I've washed your clothes, I've cooked your meals, I've borne your children. Do you love me? I've shared your destiny, I've walked your ways, I've been part of you. No, it's not the sharp duty, the sharp obligation that makes people what they are and where they are and what they're doing. It may give them impetus and so on. But ultimately, in the human Christian sense, while duties are being maintained and fulfilled and obligations are being accepted and worked from the inside out, and we recognize who and what we are, that haunting question of Tavia as he faces his wife after so many years and acknowledges and gives thanks to her for what she has done boils down to the basic question: do you love me? And would that in all of life the answer could be, I love you.